magic of the Sunstone. You're tuned into the Jewel Riders Archive.
Hey Jewel fans, I'm Chris.
And I'm Ronnie from the Jewel Riders Archive.
We are here today with a first-time guest. We're super excited to have one of the writers of the show with us, Mr. James Mattson.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Super happy to have you. I'm really curious what initially got you into writing. Because I know in our previous conversation, you'd mentioned studying English at Stanford. What kind of led to that interest?
You know, I always wanted to be a writer, even like in grade school and high school. But I have a degree in English from Stanford, and I went to the film directing program at UCLA, and I thought I wanted to be a film director. But I think my personality is much more writer than director, because I always think of the right thing to say 5 minutes later or the next, I'll go home and I'll think of the good comeback or the right thing to say. So I did the directing program. I was making a student film that, to pay for it, I was doing a low budget feature, which was very ambitious and probably too ambitious for me. The highest paying jobs I could find to help pay for my feature were animation cameraman. So I spent a couple of years being an animation cameraman for special effects animation and trying to write on the side. Then I got animation jobs, and my contacts were animation. So then my first writing jobs were in animation. I wrote for a show called Bump in the Night that ran on ABC. And I think you mentioned that you had seen Bump in the Night.
Yes, I had. And I have to say, that was one of my favorite cartoons. For our audience, if you're not familiar with Bump in the Night, you definitely need to check it out. It is a stop motion, modern cartoon. So what I initially was drawn to was, I love stop motion. And this was kind of around the time that I think Nightmare Before Christmas was also coming out. So there was a little bit of a resurgence in the popularity of the feature, using that type of animation. And so when it came on TV, I was just mesmerized by it. And more than that, it was also the fact that it took on this kind of, I guess campy is the best way to put it. It's almost like in the vein of like James Whale. Like I would imagine that he would have wanted to create such a feature. And personally, I love all things camp, and I love those classic horror. And so to have this little character who's basically like, the little man who lives under your bed, and a whole story about all of his cast of characters, it was just amazing to me. I loved it. It was so original. It was so fun. The fact that it was stop motion. So yes, it was a favorite cartoon of mine growing up.
I'm gonna have to check this out.
You do, and I have one of the DVDs.
I've never seen it. Yeah,
it's amazing. It really is. It's so cute.
Yeah, I think you mentioned my favorite script was called Night the Living Bread, where it's sort of campy, and I remember the network executive saying, "I hate movie parodies like this, but I never approve them. But this is really funny, so I'm going to approve this concept for the show." Well,
I'm so glad. Otherwise, we would have had to chalk it up with Over the Rainbow and Part of Your World, where something else was cut by a studio executive who just didn't understand.
Exactly. Yeah. Of course, the one that I wrote, I think it's called The Wash Rag of Squishington, or it was at one point where one of the characters washes his face and his face comes off in the wash rag, and the cockroaches find it and start worshiping it. And it was funny. It got approved. I think it got shot. And then the network censors looked at it and went, "This is a Shroud of Turin story, right?"
Oh no.
So I didn't get fired, but there needed to be some rewrites and reshoots where we pulled back on the Shroud of Turin reference on that one.
Oh, too bad. See, and I love that type of like tongue-in-cheek, like, referencing, pop culture. And the thing is that I think that it really had a captive audience of a very particular type of child. Maybe those children who grew up with the classic monsters or who were very aware of pop culture. And so we really appreciated things like that. But, for the everyday child, they probably just didn't get it, or they just thought, oh, it's funny. Like, but for a child who was more aware, like, that's the reason why I loved it. I just absolutely adored it.
And if even Bugs Bunny had multi-layers of meaning that kids liked it, but Bugs Bunny would do drag often and all sorts of levels of humor. And I think Bump in the Night had that too.
Definitely. I mean, you mentioned Bugs Bunny. Being someone who worked in the animation industry, I'm sure you have your classic favorite animated characters. But for me, I love Disney. Little Mermaid is one of my favorite movies, and I love their animated features and, of course, their theme parks. But animation-wise, Looney Tunes, specifically, as you said, Bugs Bunny, Tex Avery, all those, creators, for me, they stand out 1,000 times better than anything that Walt Disney did. Like Tex Avery is just so funny, like Red Hot Riding Hood, all of those classic featurettes. Like those are my favorite ones. So I think that you can obviously tell what kind of things I enjoy.
Yeah, they're just plain funny.
Exactly.
And, it's actually been really nice because the Tex Avery cartoons are being re-released by the Warner Archive finally on Blu-ray. So they're like beautiful. Yeah.
I heard a podcast with them talking about doing the Blu-rays, and they sound great.
Definitely need to go to Amazon and pick it up.
I know. And so to backtrack a little bit, you talked about working as an animation cameraman. Now, were these like shooting cell animation pieces, or did you ever shoot any of the stop motion?
I worked for a small company that did mainly titles for films and for TV commercials. So like the biggest title I worked on, the Schwarzenegger movie Total Recall, has really quite beautiful main titles that were stop motion and streaks that we created and shot. We did a lot of shiny spinning TV station logos
those were such a big thing for such a long time.
Yeah, I can do shiny chrome in my sleep right now. Of course, you'd need to reinvent the bring back the animation camera. And but we also did TV commercials. Like I remember being the cameraman on a Fred Flintstone cereal commercial that we
like a Fruity Pebbles commercial.
And then the ad agency saw it and decided Fred and Barney looked too overweight. And luckily it wasn't but we had to reshoot it because they were worried that the message was eat the cereal and
get fat.
Yeah, exactly. So there was a reshoot. So I really got a wide variety of animation experience, and then I wanted to write, and the high paying jobs at that point were supervising productions in Asia. So the first overseas job was I was effects supervisor in a city called Shenzhen, China, which is near Hong Kong, for ABC TV version of Wizard of Oz.
You worked on that?
I did Sparkles.
Oh my gosh!
Sparkles and Zaps.
That's another of my favorite shows. I love. Well, what I loved most about it was the fact that the art and the music were the original 1939 film. So that's what I really love about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the story plot, I don't know. Did you work on the stories?
No,
or were you just okay.
I did only special effects animation.
Okay, before I drag it through the mud.
Yeah.
For me, the storylines aren't quite as captivating. Later, they created another. It's not based on the MGM series, but recently they've released another Dorothy and I forget what the title of it is. Anyway, it's about 3 years ago or so that they made this other animated series based on The Wizard of Oz. And I think that the storylines are just so much nicer and they're so much more captivating. But going back to the 90s animation, like I love the music. I love the artwork. I just love the fact that it's so reminiscent of the original movie, 1939. So, yeah.
We definitely, at that point, it was we had a copy of the video that we would pour over for the look of stuff. And yeah, I remember spending a week looking at Glinda's bubble to try to match the look of Glinda's bubble. And I was in Shenzhen about 6 months on that project, and it was very interesting. I'm still friends with a couple of the Chinese staff members who've done very, very well. One of them owns a company that does, some sort of internet Chinese American services. So it was fun. And then the next job, there's a feature called Thief and the Cobbler.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
That I was part of the scab. They took it away from. It's such a sad story. The director, Richard Williams, had worked on it for over 20 years, and it was his dream project. Warner's gave him money to make it. He spent the money. The film was only 2/3 finished, and they took it away from him. And they sent a team. I was in Bangkok for 6 months, and there was another team in Hungary finishing up the movie. And but that movie has. I still believe it has some of the best minutes of animation that have ever been done, because he was so brilliant. The problem is the overall story never hung together, and it was troubled.
Yeah, like even if he had finished it himself, I think the story still might have been a little bit of a mess.
Yeah, I've seen the work print, and which is a little better than the one that was released. Also, it was finished, and then Harvey Weinstein at Miramax bought it for U.S. release, and there was a horrible recut where the thief character in the original script was mute. He never spoke. Harvey Weinstein hired Jonathan Winters to do a voiceover to express the thief's thought. And I love Jonathan Winters, but it's like sitting in front of someone annoying at a movie theater who's talking all the way through.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
it wrecked the movie. But another insult to that.
I was going to say another executive who thinks that they know what's best and tries to overrule a decision that the creative person who's in charge has made.
Yeah,
I find it interestingly though.
I find it so interesting. What?
Oh, I know fans in the last few years have made like a version of this film that they recut called like the recobbled edition that I've been meaning to get my hands on and check it out.
Yeah, that one I haven't seen, and I imagine because there were some not very good songs added in the reshoots.
Also that.
and I imagine they got pulled, and it might be better. I remember seeing it initially and just thinking it was so beautiful, but the story, there was never a completed script on it, and the story just never hung together on it.
So I'm going to interject for a moment here, a couple of thoughts that I've been harboring in my head. Jim, it's so funny that you should talk about, initially you were discussing about going to film school, and from there you decided, okay, well, you know what? It looks like the way that I can utilize what I learned is basically through camera. Was there a passion, or was it something that you kind of learned because out of necessity that you went into that field? That's one of my first questions, so I'd like to hear that.
I always loved animation, and because in high school it was sort of a choice: do I become a scientist or I become a writer? And animation production, there's always both art and science in it. And I was interested in it, and the cameraman. There's a degree of concentration you need that's exhausting, because if you make it, at that point there was no way to correct a mistake, that you could be shooting on a scene for like literally 8 hours, and then if you made one mistake at the end of 8 hours, you pulled the film out of the camera and started over. So I loved the technology of it, and the craft of it, and the art of it, and was always an animation fan. So it was a good fit for me as both as a job and something I was interested in.
Okay. And then something else for our listeners, when a lot of the technology changing, especially in the 90s, when you're in the field starting out, if you can kind of explain some of the processes, because especially when we're talking about stop motion, like Bump in the Night, I mean, immediately my mind kind of goes to something like a Ray Harryhausen, sitting in his studio shooting it frame by frame, versus, now it's all computer manipulated. And also when we're talking about hand-drawn animation, like The Wizard of Oz as an example, and you're talking about the special effects animation, again, some studios like Disney were starting to use digital, computer animations, and so other studios were still doing everything by hand, and then laying over that special effects, whether it was a cell or whatever it is, over the original animation, and then that was being photographed. So to kind of give a little bit more context to our listeners, can you explain the process, and maybe a little bit more specifically what you were in charge of?
Yeah, in the early 90s, there was no computer animation being done at that point. So the things I worked in were still hand drawn, hand inked, and then painted cells. I know one of the Chinese studios I worked at had worked on Little Mermaid, but Little Mermaid had a little bit of computer paint in it.
Yes.
But even then, it was mainly conventional ink and paint. So it was, the camera, you would shoot things one frame at a time, and for Bump in the Night, they were puppets on armatures, on wire armatures, that they would move them one frame at a time. They move it a tiny bit, take a photograph, move it a little more, take a photograph, and then when you play that back at 24 frames a second, it looks like they're moving. And the creators of Bump in the Night, they had worked on. There was a reboot of the Gumby series, so yes. They had worked a year or two on the Gumby reboot, which was also shot on film, kind of old style stop motion. So they were funny, very funny guys, but very good at stop motion. But something like Wizard of Oz or Princess Guinevere and the Jewel Riders were the animators drew it on white paper with pencil. Those shows, you then Xerox the lines onto a clear cell. Painters would take that clear cell and do paint by numbers where they're filling in the areas. And then the cells would come to me in the camera department. When I was the cameraman, I would shoot it. As the effects animator, like on Wizard of Oz, there were a lot of twinkles, sparkles. The witch did magical zaps. I was the king of sparkles for that shoot.
That's a great title.
Yeah. And that was
Right.
you would film it, run the film through the camera once, and do the animation. You'd rewind the film, and then you would add it would be a double exposure, and you would add my sparkles, my twinkles, my zaps to that. And there'd be a lot of testing for that. Although I showed up in China, I think we were like 2 weeks from the first air date on ABC Saturday Morning, because I replaced someone who wasn't, who the footage wasn't coming out. So it was a really stressful couple of months with desperately trying to finish the film, and it would be shipped to LA, and they'd have to transfer it overnight, and it would be on Saturday morning TV the next morning.
My goodness, such a schedule. There just was a real handcrafted element of the animation then, and I always enjoyed Princess Guinevere. It was a studio in a city called Suzhou, China, which is about 10 miles outside of Shanghai, and I think I was there for about 6 weeks setting them up on the effects animation for that show. And Princess Guinevere was conventional ink and paint on that too. But I always enjoyed walking through the paint department and watching. It was mainly women at that point painting these cells, and there would be racks of drying cells, and it's so both industrial and kind of a craft, and a lot to keep track of.
Is this Hong Ying Animation in China? Was that the name of the studio?
Yeah, they also call themselves, it was like Golden Dragon, or
I think they had a number of names. Yeah.
It was owned by Wong Film, which had the main studio was in Taiwan, but it was a offshoot of them.
Yeah, that's the name that they're credited as in the end titles. So that's the only name that we've ever known them by. Yeah. When you're talking about all these things, again, if we have Disney fans out there, the immediate thing that I think of is somewhat of like the Reluctant Dragon, like the behind the scenes studio tour of the studio in the 40s, like seeing all these ink and paint women and seeing the camera department. And it's like my mind, that's immediately what it goes to. And I'm sure it had changed by the 90s, but I think that in my mind, it's always kind of that timeless studio experience. So, when you're talking about filming the scenes and whatnot, like the way that I see it as there was this large area where you could put down the background, and then you put the cell over the background, and then you bring down this glass a screen or something. It goes over the cell, and then it takes a picture because the suspended camera is above it or whatever it might be. Is that the same setup, or had things changed by that point?
No, it was exactly done that way in the early 90s, both here in LA and in the Chinese studios. the because the animation cells had a specific set of pegs, and in the 90s we were still using the same markings as they would have done at Disney in the 40s. I remember seeing production sheets called exposure sheets from Disney productions from the 40s and thinking, oh, I could shoot this scene today if I had,
Oh my
if I had
gosh.
the artwork. And,
Right, if you had all the original assets. That's so funny. Well, Chris,
until computers changed everything by the late 90s, it was, the difference was they sent it to Asia because at that point the labor was so much cheaper than here, was why it was sent overseas.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, Chris, we're going to have to include a link, a YouTube link, either that or I'll share it, to the clips that I'm thinking of, like the behind the scenes tour where they show
definitely.
the animation camera. That way any listener can see it. Jim, also when you're talking about the double exposure, I think for my in my head, I often think of double exposure special effects shots more for live action. I honestly never thought about them from animation. So was that to give it like an opacity that, a typical painted cell didn't have? Or why did you double expose?
Usually to add a glow, to make something glow with a soft edge on it. You could... sometimes that's done with paint and airbrush for the painters, but on something like Oz or Princess Guinevere, they wanted it to glow with a very soft edge on the things that are glowing. So we were actually using a light box with backlit. That pass, all you would see was the zap or the sparkle, and it would be black all around, and just the sparkle would be superimposed over the rest of the scene.
Cool. So neat. I love it.
And on something, Roger Rabbit changed the look of animations because everything had shadows. The characters themselves had shadows on them to add dimension to them. And then the look of animation in general, and this is my theory, but I think I'm correct here, it changed after that. So we would do multiple passes to add the character shadows too often, because it would be easier than painting the shadows in. You would do an exposure with the character, and then another exposure to darken part of the character. That fairly easy to do, although conceptually, it's hard to explain, and if you made a mistake, it would look really, really bad too.
No, that's always the risk that you run when you're double exposing film. Like how you said, you've already shot the one layer of it. Now you're double exposing it. And if you mess up, well, now you're going to do the whole thing over again.
Yeah, exactly. But look at, like, Fantasia has the most beautiful animation special effects work ever done, I think. The Night on Bald Mountain sequence has the ghosts and the spirits are superimposed over it. And it looks like there's even like a ripple glass added to make them ripple. I'll sometimes go through it frame by frame and try to figure out how they did everything. And that obviously was 1940s on that.
Right. Yeah, no, Fantasia, I love Fantasia for the special effects. If I'm awake and not tired, I will watch that movie. However, if I'm tired, it's the bedtime lullaby for me, because it's so soothing and so beautiful to look at. Soon you find yourself just falling off to slumberland. But specifically when you were talking about those ghosts in Night on Bald Mountain, at least from the photos that I've seen, it looks like they bent the cell artwork and were double exposing the shot, but they had it kind of like on a rounded, I don't know, like a drum or something, so that like when they were like So that's why the ghosts look like they kind of like pop out at you and then like float away. So
you're definitely right on that. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, it's so fun. I love animation so much. So from Wizard of Oz and working in China, from there, where does the story go and when does Guinevere come in?
Well, one of the producers on Wizard of Oz she was an executive for a company called DIC, DIC.
Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with.
And DIC produced Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
And then she was one of the producers on Princess Guinevere. So she had liked my work on Oz on Effects, and I met with her and said, I would love to work on the show on effects, and I'm also trying to start working as a writer. And she, as I remember, I had a sample script that the creator of the show was a man named Robert Mandel, and she sent Robert my sample, and he liked the sample. And so I got hired both for effects and to write the episode that I wrote for Guinevere.
I love it. Which is Love Struck. Love Struck is the episode that Jim wrote. Now, when you say she, does she have a name or is she like the she?
She is, I should, Winnie Chafee.
Oh, yes. Okay, Winnie. Yes.
And she, God, I just saw an announcement that she has a new show right now, and I'm blanking. I want to say it's an animated version of Harriet the Spy, but I could be wrong. Could be wrong on that. No, she's a terrific producer. I grew up in Taiwan and but worked in the U.S. most of her career.
So she worked a lot as a go-between between the Asian production companies and the sort of Western staff.
She did some of that, but like for DIC, she was just or not just. She was a creative producer for DIC. That was obviously, I think, had worked in animation. If I remember right, her first job was on Tron, the Disney feature, doing Tron had it was all special effects on film, and it had a lot of copying live action film onto black and white cells. If I remember right, she was worked on those cells.
Is that how they did the backlighting for all of the costumes and stuff? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they got the glows, and it's part of why that movie looks so cool but so odd, is that it's all been or the inside the Tron stuff has all been recopied.
No, that movie definitely, like so many special effects movies, is a cult classic.
Yeah. I think it's more fun to look at than, I know a lot of people love it as a movie, but I like it more as an effects movie than as a movie.
Yeah.
Then I would take the overseas job. Finally, after Thief and the Cobbler, I had enough money to just write full time and try to have scripts to sell. And at that point, I had a friend who is still my writing partner today. My friend Barbara she was working on a novel. I was writing an action movie that wasn't going very well. We had lunch, and I had a live action comedy idea, and Barbara had such funny ideas for it just over lunch that we said, let's write that one in our spare time. And of course, that's the one that sold. There was a bidding war for it. It sold to Disney, and we've been working together mainly in live action ever since then. And it was, people still, Disney owns it outright. It was never made, but it was a live action comedy called Fluffy, about a man who finds his perfect woman, and her cat hates him and tries to kill him. So it's man versus cat ultimately he realizes the cat is just being protective of his owner, and they reach an understanding. But Disney thought about making it. They they canceled the project. DreamWorks actually tried to buy it from Disney, and Disney said, "You're suing us over Katzenberg. We're not selling you this script." And it's still in the base. It's somewhere in the basement of the Disney script archives. But Barbara and I did work for Disney Feature Animation for about a year. We were adapting a version of the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Nightingale, never produced. And I think we weren't the first writers on it, and we weren't the last ones. But the most fun part of that job is then we finished the script, and then for a couple of months we worked on a project that Roy Disney, I guess it's Roy E. Disney, was producing. So we got to have meetings with Roy and hear Disney stories, and it was at that point Disney owned the book Mr. Popper's Penguins. That was later it was turned into a Jim Carrey movie, but at that point Disney wanted to do a feature of it, so we did a draft of Mr. Popper's Penguins for Roy Disney. Also ended up in somewhere in the basement at Disney.
I'm sure Dave's
project to do.
All of them were.
Yeah.
So Jim, then from basically saying, well, hey, I have a passion for writing, and obviously I'm good at what I do. And when he hires you, and you're already in China, so do you start getting animation? Do you get scripts? Do you get style guides? What is the Jewel Writer's story?
There was for the script. There was a complete Bible. There were the character sheets. And my episode was, I don't think it was part of the overall story arc. I think it was more or less of a standalone
feature,
standalone episode. And I believe that I pitched them the story concept, and they liked it and said, yeah, write a draft of that, and I'm sure I did a draft and then a rewrite, and then it went into production.
Now that episode is like a slapstick comedy episode, and now it all sort of makes sense to me with your background writing comedy. I love comedy, and it probably is more slapsticky than the rest of the series, which is funny. I mean, personally, I love the episode. I think it's like a kind of a breath of fresh air, just to have the characters be so over the top.
Well, not only that, but it features Drake. So was it something that you saw potential to feature the main boy protagonist, or why? And that's the only reason why Chris loves the episode so much, is because he loves Drake, and he's probably in love with Drake too. But, so it's why did you focus on this character where the rest of the series focuses on the girls, basically?
I probably pitched them a couple of ideas, and they probably had everything for the girls worked out already. And probably me coming in with a story for one of the boys, they thought, oh, we can add that in, and that'll fit.
Yeah, it's like an unexplored corner, basically.
Yeah, of that universe.
You had given examples of, your background is comedy. Do you remember anything else about the creation or the writing of the script of Love Struck?
I remember a note that and I don't remember if it ended up in the episode or not, but the note was the toy company was going to put out a toy with the horses that involved brushing the horse's mane. So a note I had was to try to incorporate horse mane brushing into the episode so they could it would work with the toy.
Synergy.
Yeah. I remember thinking that was pretty cute. No, I remember the scripts are relatively short. They're about 20 pages because for both live action and animation, the rule is always that it's about a minute. A page of script equals a minute of screen time. So I remember conference calls. I don't remember where Robert Mandel and his company was based. They may have been in Vancouver at that point, but I don't remember that.
I think they were based out of Southern California at the time, or New York.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the actors were from New York, but who knows?
That makes
unknown.
Yeah, because I definitely did not meet with them in person here in LA, so maybe they were in New York on that. No, I remember. It must have gone pretty simply and uneventfully because I don't. It's the horror stories that you remember, and I remember having fun with it, being treated well, and it was good.
Well, I'm glad that there's no horror stories.
Yes.
Speaking of special effects, though, since that's obviously what what Winnie fell in love with was about your talent, what effects did you work on with Jewel Riders, or what happened with that?
In the main titles, there's a glowing portal effect, and that was the glowing portal was the thing that we tested and that they liked on that. And then it was, even that show has twinkles and sparkles and glowing zaps.
An abundance, one might say.
I remember being in Suzhou with probably 20 people from the animation department, with me explaining the effects setup for the show. And there would be a translator, the Chinese staff, and me holding up artwork and saying, for these portals you use this artwork, this exposure, and they work this way. Yeah, it was things I did were things you couldn't do with conventional ink and paint, or we did some, or it would be ink and paint, but in an additional pass through the camera to add them.
I see. And when you're saying portals, at least when you're talking about the main titles, the only thing that I can really think of though is in the first season at least. I'm assuming, did you go on to the work on the show during the second season, or was it only during the first season?
Only in the first.
Okay. So in the first season, on the opening titles, do you mean the episode titles, or do you mean like the series intro?
As I remember, for the series intro. Now, okay. I haven't watched those in a long time, so I need to rewatch them.
I'd be interested to see actually what it was that you filmed. I'm interested.
Yeah. Can I look at it real fast?
Of course, Of course, yeah. If you just type in Jewel Riders intro.
Okay, so looking through it, there's the kind of swirling thing around the girls with stars where they're changing clothes. That was me. I did the
smoke pattern and the sparkles and
and then the next shot, one of the characters is holding up her arm, and there's a golden glowing zap coming out of the Jewel. That would have been me in that. And then what I call a portal, it's pink and it has kind of a raised pattern coming out of it. That it's almost a moire pattern of rays. That was me. I'll try to remember to send you a screenshot of that.
And, you were mentioning about the script and how, each of them were so long and whatnot. I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of look at our website or not, but we do have a copy of the Love Struck script as well. So if you'd like to see it again, we have a copy.
Because I looked through my files and I couldn't find I don't know what format I wrote that in, because the screenwriting software has changed. So, and then a question I have for you. I don't know the story of why it was changed from Princess Guinevere to Starla.
Oh, the fan favorite question. Go ahead, Chris.
As far as we've been able to discover or find, talking with Greg Attore, who's the show's art designer, it was basically like a rights issue. Like, it's easier to trademark something like Starla in other countries outside of the U.S. rather than Guinevere.
Because Guinevere exists as a public domain character.
Right. But I also am like, but they spelled her name specifically in a way that is different from the classic Guinevere.
Right. The Guinevere. It's Guinevere.
G-U-I-N instead of G-W-E-N.
Right. But I do think that you're right. I mean, I think that it was an opportunity to have a more specific name that people might identify with the show, rather than Guinevere. So it's Starla. But what he was saying is that also it just translates better. So, especially when you call her Princess Guinevere, but if it's just Starla, it's just easier just in all the different languages to be Starla versus Princess Guinevere, because they hardly ever just call her Guinevere in the Jewel Riders. So
I see.
Yeah.
That does make sense. And I'm asking you questions. Was there a Camelot? There was a Camelot connection in the show, or not?
There's a
really?
very vague Camelot connection.
Well, it started out.
Yeah, there's a connection for this series that, strangely enough, goes all the way back to Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern. And they were talking about making an animated adaptation of these science fiction books. But it eventually morphs into, when that project sort of falls apart, it morphs into a series called Enchanted Camelot that is basically like a young Princess Guinevere, like of the Arthurian Guinevere, as far as I can tell. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it moves into the sort of much more lightly Arthurian Guinevere in living in New Camelot, but there's still Merlin. And, and that's pretty much the extent of it. And and the land is called Avalon.
Yeah, there's the land of Avalon. There's also the Lady of the Lake that appears in the last episodes. That there is a very, very thin Arthurian, right, Morgana. And well, I was going to say Archie for Archimedes, but I think that that's more associated with Sword in the Stone than King Arthur.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there definitely is a medieval Arthurian connection to it, but I think it's just been updated where, the Crystal Palace has elevators, and although they still ride horses and have carriages, they also have TVs and other things. So, it's kind of like a modern fairy tale, but set supposedly sometime. We're never sure. We're never really know if it's the current time period, which I think it kind of is, because in the French sticker book, it even says once upon a time and knights and dragons. No, our story takes place today, and imagine our heroines going out to the disco after they save the day. So that's the way that the French book described it.
Yes, specifically the disco. which is my favorite piece of that.
Which is fun. You know, when you think about it, it's almost a steampunk sensibility where you can mix and match technology and classic elements.
Steampunk, yes, but I would say, it's funny when we talk to fans, and, a lot of times when I talk to people on the street and they ask me, oh, tell me about the Jewel Riders archive, and I have to explain to them what Jewel Riders is, I immediately default to, it's kind of like She-Ra meets My Little Pony meets Sailor Moon. Like, that's always my description of it. But the truth is, Sailor Moon and She-Ra have a very... I don't know if gender neutral is the right word, but it's not necessarily girly. Mm-hmm. And while I think that a lot of studios out there were very hesitant to put out girl shows, everything kind of had this mixed gender audience. It seems as though Jewel Riders was unabashedly feminine. And whether that created a strong audience in young girls and young gay boys and that select few straight boys, but it was something that's why we love about it. It's like, the fact that it is kind of, campy in its own way of having this very... I like to think of her as a dominatrix. I know Chris doesn't, but the villainous, she wears leather and she's very campy and she's sexy. Like, that's what I love about this villainess. And then to have the heroines, the pack, like, all these defenders of the kingdom, like, you can identify with each of these characters. And of course, Chris found his own little, a love interest in Drake. But, while I never fell for any of the boys, I still identified with the girls. And I was like, Tamara's my favorite character because of, or I love her hair, or I just want to do what she does. And so for me, it was the design of the show. It was the way that the story was written. It was a quest episode. It was not just girly. It wasn't like, Barbie and the Rockers, the animated series, which is, amazing. But it's, it still had action. It's still, you could look up to these heroines. So that's what we love about the series.
Yeah, it's not quite as dark as the She-Ra animated series tends to be.
Right.
Which is really nice. And I don't know, I love Guinevere as a heroine because they let her be a little bratty. Like, which, what child kind of can't identify with being a little bratty sometimes.
Right.
She doesn't have to be like a model, like necessarily, she doesn't have to be a model character. She can just be a character.
And I think that really comes through in Carrie Butler's performance.
And it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it being a project aimed more at girls, because for kids projects, the rule in a lot of studio meetings has always been that girls will watch boys' projects, but boys won't watch girls' projects. So default to boys if given a choice.
Right.
And they defaulted to the strong girls in this show.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a fascinating production story. It really is, because exactly what you're saying. I think that, when Robert Mandel was creating this, while the first few episodes are, I would say, very gender neutral. I mean, they're not heavily focused for girls, but I think that, whether you're a boy or a girl, you would watch this. But I think that many boys would see it more as a girl's show with the unicorns and the princess and things like that. But exactly what we're talking about with the toy aesthetics, where you were told, we're going to create the unicorns to have brushable, tails. So make sure that that's a point in the show. They didn't create necessarily boy toys. They were making dolls. But again, that's something that we love about the show. We love the fact that they are dolls, but they're not necessarily fashion dolls. They were like little action figures with hair. And I think that that's one of the reasons why Chris liked them, because he's always leaned more towards the boy toys. But I liked them because they still had doll aesthetics to them, because I love Barbie.
It was nice because as a child I could buy them, and it's not like buying a Barbie. And, you don't have to convince your parents that hard to buy a Jewel Rider toy versus a Barbie, right? Like, So it was like it's something that you could have that was sort of slightly cloaked as
that they're not dolls, they're action figures.
exactly, they're action dolls.
Yeah, Chris, how long did you say that for?
I mean, but they really are very action figure. They have molded bodies in their shapes of their clothes, and really the only doll things are
The
if you
deluxes.
strip it all away are the deluxe ones with their clothing, and the fact that they have doll heads and brushable
Party
hair.
dresses,
Yeah,
which is always why they were my favorite ones.
of course.
And who was the toy company? Was it?
It was Kenner.
Kenner.
Kenner. I mean, well, at that point, Kenner was owned by Hasbro.
Oh, okay. Because I remembered it being Hasbro, but I wasn't sure that I remembered correctly. So
yeah, so it was Hasbro.
Well, then later
pretending that Kenner is a brand.
I was gonna say later Kenner went out of business, and they're only the name is only ever used on re-releases of the Star Wars figures and other action toys. But yeah, I mean, when we're talking about the toy and the production, did they ever send you like any references, like, oh, this is features that we're doing on the toys other than just the brushable hair? Or I know you said that you were given like the character specs in the show Bible. Like, did you have anything else that you referenced when you were working on the show?
There would have been, there would have been artwork for all the characters, so I knew what everybody looked like, and I would have known how hunky Drake is as a character, but no, I wouldn't have been sent the toys.
Okay,
they may not have been, because we were probably in production at least 6 months, if not a year, before it premiered. So the toys may not have been finished yet.
Now, Chris, you're going to have to look at that link. Was this 1994 or what was this draft of Love Struck? Because I know things like every time.
This draft is dated 4/17/95.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, you're kind of right, Jim, because it came out in September, and this particular episode would have debuted later. So, yeah, I guess it was about 6 or 7 months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there you go. Did you have any influence? I know that you said that you were given the character designs and whatnot, but something that has always stuck out with me about this particular episode is the characters wear costumes that they never wear again. Were you ever like influenced by any of this? Like, did they ever ask you for opinions, or was that a different department?
I don't remember them telling me don't create a new, or sometimes they will say, don't create something new because it'll be a problem that we have to design a new costume. But they were totally accepting of whatever I created for the
Story-wise.
episode.
But did you do like artwork? Like, did you do concept art or anything like that?
No, I would have had a description. Yeah, it would have been one sentence in a description. Sometimes they'll go, you can't do that because we would have to design a whole new set of wardrobe for that. And I don't remember anything being sent back for changes because they wanted to reuse other wardrobe.
I think it's interesting in the script, when it talks about where they first appear with their new outfits on, it just says both are wearing party dresses, but party is in bold, which is like, was that a reference to the toy party dresses?
I don't remember. I would have done it just to call attention that when the designer is skimming the script, they see that.
Because I know with like the style guides, they have their references for all of their different outfits and wardrobes.
So, Jim, after Jewel Riders, I mean, as kind of like a ending recap, where did you go from there, and where are you now?
I've been working as a screenwriter since then. Yeah, Barbara, my writing partner, and I have sold a number of spec scripts. The feature that was produced, there's a movie called Deliver Us from Eva with LL Cool J and Gabrielle Union in the leads that was made from our script, and it's on Peacock right now, streaming free. So it was fun to go to the premiere of that, and we've sold. I've heard a statistic that the studios buy 35 scripts for every one they make. So a number of our scripts are in the they bought it and never made it. I like romantic comedies, and we were selling romantic comedies, and about 10 years ago, the market shifted where there were so many flop rom-coms that they weren't selling. So our agent told us, the market has shifted. The studios are looking for intellectual property. They're looking for books. So Barbara and I took 2 years off from screenwriting and wrote a book series called Oh My Godmother that Disney Hyperion Press published. And it's about an ordinary 12-year-old girl who accidentally becomes a fairy godmother. And fun and hijinks ensue. Yeah, she accidentally damages the wand arm of rival at school's fairy godmother, and kind of karmically she has to fill in to do the fairy godmother duties on that. And that was really fun. There were 3 of them published, and we got to do school visits and bookstore visits, and I loved, because the audience for those is 8 to 12-year-olds. And it was fun getting letters from kids saying they liked it. And it's almost like me with the Princess Guinevere episode, not quite remembering that we would go on school visits and the kids would remember much more about my own book than I did. Well, why did that happen? I'd have to say, what page was that on?
Refresh my memory.
Refresh my memory. So we did those. And then luckily for us, we started, Hallmark is still making romantic comedies. So a couple of years ago, a producer called our agent, and she had just parted ways with a writer and was desperate for a writer, and we've done 2 movies with her. The Christmas one is called Northern Lights of Christmas, that should be airing. Hallmark repeats things a lot, so I'm sure it'll play between now and Christmas. It'll play six or 7 times. And that one, woman inherits reindeer farm at Christmas.
Oh my gosh!
And our other produced credit is there's a movie called Marrying Mr. Darcy. That's a sequel to a movie called Unleashing Mr. Darcy, where it's sort of a modern day Pride and Prejudice story with dogs. And that was fun to do. So right now we're working on Hallmark ideas, we're pitching things, and still busy.
Nice. Well, I will
thank
have
you
to
so
definitely
much.
check out some of those Hallmark movies, because those sound like a lot of fun for Christmas.
Right.
The fun thing about the Hallmark movies is I'll mention other things and people go blank, and then I say Hallmark and they sort of light up. I'll give the titles and they'll go, "Oh, my mom and I watched that." and it's really fun.
Well, you definitely did that for me when we were discussing all those animated shows that you worked on. I mean, did you ever think that you'd be sitting down with someone and they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, Bump in the Night, Wizard of Oz, Princess Guinevere," like all those shows that you worked on?
I never did. So I was amazed that you had, like, the Oz. I rarely meet anyone who's ever heard of the animated version of Wizard of Oz. So it's fun.
Well, we appreciate all of your dedication to the animated industry all through all these years. And thank you so much for sitting with us today, too.
Oh, thank you for talking with me. It's been really fun.
It's been a total pleasure to have you on the show. So if people want to find out more about your work, do you have a website they can visit?
There's a website with my writing partner called braunermattson.com.
Okay.
braunermattson.com. And I'm on Twitter as James Ivor Mattson.
Awesome. We will link all of those in the show notes for any of you who want to follow James and his work. And if you want to find out more from the Jewel Writers Archive, you can find us at www.jewelwritersarchive.com, or you can find us on any social media at Jewel Writers or at Jewel Writers Archive. And if you want to listen to more of these podcasts, you can find us at our home on Podbean or on any format that you enjoy listening to podcasts on. Thanks so much for being on the show, James. And as we always like to say, friends together, friends
forever. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you guys have a fantastic day.